who was a former sommelier, how she cut her teeth in the wine business, and her husband, Ken Pahlow, who came up through a combination of, oh God, you did everything, right? You worked at St. Innocent, right down the road from where you are now, and also worked for a pretty serious wine distributor, Galaxy, out of Portland. So you guys both obviously have a lot of experience with the wines of the world before setting up Walter Scott, which I believe you did in 2009, correct? Or 2008, and 2009, and 2009 was the first time you went commercial, or you had enough wine to actually start making, hopefully, making a little bit of money.
About that.
Yeah. So welcome. So yeah, I gave that little start off for you. What got you to convince you to set up shop where you are?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, we started the winery with, two pennies and a dream and a wish. And so we had the very amazing ability to trade labor for space for the first three vintages, the first year at Patricia Grain Cellars with Jim and Patty. And then the two subsequent years at Evenyland, which was based in the Eola Amity Hills. But really, Ken at St. Innocent would say that he cut his teeth in the Eola Amity Hills on vineyards like Justice Vineyards, Seven Springs, Temperance Hill, O'Connor, all of these iconic, amazing sites. And for him and for me, with my experience with the Willamette Valley wines, our part was always in this AVA for the stylistic wines that it was creating. And
in 2012, we had an opportunity. I had decided to leave Eveningland, and we found this facility that we leased from Pat Dudley and Ted Castile, who own Justice Vineyard. So we sit, right in the middle of some fairly, prestigious vineyard land that we look out upon. I mean, all of our Eola Amity Hills sites that we work with are within 5 to 10 minutes of where we are, and it's a really special and fortunate place that we get to live in and work in.
This AVA too had, it's a very small community of people that are very tightly knit. I mean, all of us would openly ask somebody if, a piece of equipment broke and we needed help, or, we've helped each other unload tanks. Where we taste in each other's cellars. And so there's a tight knit community down here. It's a little bit less commercial than, not that that's a bad thing. Up north has a lot more traffic and bigger facilities, whereas down here it's a very family owned and operated small community. And so and a lot of the wineries that inspired us in our previous careers are down here, from Evesham Wood to the Bethel Heights and the Castile Dudley family. Chris Dumb, Steve Dorner is such an iconic winemaker. And so people that we looked up to were around us, and being a part of this community was a huge honor.
Yeah, very much.
Yeah, and I always find it interesting looking at the addresses of your address and all the people around you is Salem, which is 20 minutes, 25 minutes away.
Yeah. I mean, we're sort of halfway in between Salem and McMinnville. So we like to consider ourselves the old Amity Hills, really, for our address.
Right. Sure. Well, you're I guess you're literally within the township or whatever you call it, the hamlet of Bethel.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
And then so in lingua franca, Stangeland are in Hopewell.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah. Just little hamlets.
Yeah. It's I've learned not to let my gas tank go down too far, because I think the nearest gas is over in Amity.
Yeah.
And if up north, there are gas stations, but they close at around 8 o'clock.
Yes.
Yeah, but you'd be fortunate. Anyway, if you were to run out of gas around here, anyone would stop and offer some assistance for sure.
Most people have gas tanks around here.
Yeah, it's very.
If you run out of gas on Long Island and somebody pulls over, you may not be to help. And we were talking a little bit earlier about what makes the Eola Amity Hills so interesting and unique. I mean, each subregion, each AVA in the Willamette Valley does have distinct soils, obviously exposures. I mean, soil has always been an important thing. Volcanic, maritime. And weather seems to me to have a more important place in the winemakers practices in your area than in other areas. I've learned that over the years.
You know, we are very fortunate that the Eola Amity Hills are located right in the mouth of the Van Duzer corridor. So the Van Duzer corridor is the lowest point in the northern Oregon Coast Range and acts as this big air conditioner, and it affects all of the AVAs in the northern Willamette Valley, certainly. But one of the facts that I really like to point to when comparing it, for instance, is you have some larger wineries with vineyards in the Dundee Hills, in Eola Amity Hills, or in Yamhill Carlton, and they have weather stations in them. And one of the facts and figures that really drove it home, the impact of the Van Duzer corridor on the Eola Amity Hills, is seeing some of that weather data and seeing that if a gust of wind comes through the Van Duzer corridor, it hits us. And then it takes about 10 or 15 minutes to get up to Dundee or Yamhill Carlton, and has much softened its impact by that. So we tend to be 10 to 15 miles an hour stronger than the wind currents coming through the Van Duzer corridor. It also helps to moderate the weather here. So during the winter, if we have a snow or ice storm that hits Portland, you get snow and ice up in the Dundee Hills, you get snow and ice in the Chehalis Mountains, but the Eola Amity Hills will often not get it at all because it's moderated.
It's
by
very
that.
disappointing to
It's
her.
very
'Cause she
disappointing.
loves
Yes, I love snow. But then in the summer, we tend to be 10 degrees cooler at night. So we'll have a shift. We'll go from, in the 90s during the day to the 50s at night.
Like
regularly.
Today, for example, I believe it's going to be the hottest day of the year. It's supposed to be around 90 so far. We usually get our heat spikes towards the end of July and into August. But we'll drop down into the high 40s, low 50s tonight. So that's a 40-degree diurnal shift. Yeah,
and that really helps retain the acid in the fruit. And that defines the electricity and the tension that I think you find, which really has, for us, is what we're looking for in the wines because of our background. And we really love classics and are inspired by old world and lower alcohols, higher acid levels. And so we wanted that. And that's really why we focused our energy down here. Yeah. The soils are very rocky and very thin in the Eola Amity Hills, which also, I think, affects the ripening and the tannin density.
Yeah, I got to experience that many years ago. My first visit to see Steve Dorner at Christum, your neighbor, and it was end of the day tasting. So it was around 5 o'clock or so, and he said, "Look, I want to take you up to the top first thing. Look at the vineyards anyway, but take you up to the very top." Where they have a weather station up there, a little one. And he said, just walk around here for a bit, go back down to the winery, taste. And at the end of it, which was about 2 hours or so later, he said, let's go back up. And the change by the time we got up there, which was probably 7:30, 8 o'clock at night, was unreal.
Yeah. So absolutely. We tell people when pre-COVID, when we used to have gatherings, you're going to come over for a barbecue, bring layers, bring a Patagonia jacket, bring whatever.
Friends are like, you're crazy. It's 85 degrees.
But by the end of the night, everyone had their jackets on. People have wool hats on. I mean, it's no joke.
Temperance Hill is, a short walk or a little hike to the top of it from our front door. And we could be all in short sleeve shirts and shorts, hike up to the top. Everyone brings a hoodie. And by the time the sun is setting, the wind is howling up there. There's still some single wire hanging trellising up there. And so those shoots, which are usually draping down, are horizontal because the wind is just howling through there. And the temperature has dropped 30 degrees within about a 1.5 mile walk.
Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed also one way I think you can tell a little bit about what the conditions are at a certain winery is how many T-shirts they sell versus fleeces and vests.
Yeah.
And in Oregon in general, you guys saw a lot of warm clothing, and it's true.
Pinot 2002, when I was a camp counselor, when I was working for St. Innocent, we had an outdoor dinner at Christum, and it was again a hot day, warm. By the end of the night, everyone was covered in Christum swag because no one had brought any coats or anything. So you looked around, and everyone's wearing like Christum hoodies and Christum sweatshirts, and we had to hand them all out because It was
Freezing.
absolutely freezing.
Mhm.
And so what do you think, what is that? I shouldn't say what you think. What do you know? That must draw out your growing season. I mean, you begin a little bit, you're going to begin later,
Yeah.
but you're also going to extend further out than your neighbors to the north.
For sure. So we're generally 10 to 14 days behind our neighbors to the north in starting bud break. And then when we start picking, for me, as soon as I see my friends like Josh Bergstrom or Doug Tennell start picking Chardonnay, I'm like, I'm ready to go. And our fruit's just not ready.
Yeah.
And that moderating effect and those cooling breezes definitely have a dramatic influence on what happens here. But the breezes also help with farming, mildew pressure. It's a huge benefit to what happens down here.
And that leads us to the varieties that you've chosen, which I'm actually seeing a bit of Syrah popping up.
Yeah.
Christum, obviously.
Yep.
Was one of the first, I believe, one of the first in the whole valley, right, to plant
I think
Syrah.
so.
Yeah, he's got Syrah at his own vineyard. He's always been a big fan. Obviously, Marcus Goodfellow has made Syrah for a while, but from a northern vineyard.
I think Josh Bergstrom might have planted some, maybe.
Oh, Adelsheim has planted some, but I think they may have ripped it out.
Yeah.
Up there. So, I mean, you see some pockets of it, but it's kind of interesting. I think that Steve Dorner was pretty looking ahead, especially if you look at the style of Syrah that
Mhm.
people want today.
Yeah.
It definitely fits more into, let's say, the Pinot Chardonnay palette of flavors than the old days, they say the Zinfandel side, the darker, blacker side that we all knew back in the 90s.
There's
So I
also a
think that could
lot
be
of
interesting.
Gamay. In the valley,
Yeah,
Gamay really
the-
popular now.
Well, I've noticed that at Gamay, the prices keep going up because they're obviously using really good Chardonnay and Pinot land,
Right.
but which I totally understand. I'm happy they're still making it because a lot of people do a really nice job with it. So Chardonnay, 20 years ago, Chardonnay was a real afterthought, I think, throughout the valley. I mean, a few people were doing a serious job with it, but today that's been completely changed.
Yeah, it's the shift in the last 5 to 10 years has been incredibly dramatic. There are Chardonnay only producers. There are vineyards being planted only to Chardonnay. The attention both in the vineyard and in the cellars to Chardonnay, and not it being an afterthought. Oh, it's going to ferment in the other room. We'll deal with it later. But just the details and the attention to making it, and with real vision and focus. It's not an afterthought anymore. It's made with intention and with vision, and in many cases, people trying to show off what these places have to say, and not just making just a Chardonnay that tastes like it's from anywhere, but actually has real typicity and has a voice of what the Willamette Valley has to say.
There's always been really amazing producers that have been dedicated to the varietal here, without question. A handful of them that have inspired and led the way.
Yeah.
But I think what you're seeing is on a much wider scale, and certainly the farming is, I think, really where it's coming down to. I mean, people will talk about clones. I think that was not really ever the issue. It was more about how well the fruit was farmed, how much was hanging, how well it was kept, the sites that it was going into. And with that changing and growers being able to get a reasonable tonnage price for the Chardonnay fruit, it's allowed them to invest in the varietal in a way that they couldn't before, because you had to hang almost twice as much Chardonnay to get the same economic value out of an acre of Pinot Noir previously, and that doesn't bode for high quality farming.
No, not at all. And as Eric was pointing out, growers are, instead of putting Pinot Noir in the best part of the vineyard, they're putting Chardonnay in the best part of the vineyard.
In some occasions, like on Bethel Heights Road, where we are alone, in the last 7 years, there's been, I think over 60 acres of Chardonnay have gone in.
Yep.
And that's east slope between 450 and 750 feet of elevation, like epic Eola Amity Hills land that would never have gone to anything but Pinot Noir in the past without question. I mean, never would have been considered, and now it's all Chardonnay.
Yeah.
And so that kind of speaks to what's happening, I think.
And what about changes in clonal selections? Because obviously, 20 years ago, when things started to get moving, there was quite a bit of Dijon being
Yeah.
planted, but I don't think that's so much the case these days.
I think the biggest movement you're seeing now, and we're very fortunate to work with one of the sites. I think there's more and more people doing Masal type plantings,
Yeah,
looking at a minimum of say 4 or 5 clones to plant, including some 108, some Wente, some 95, some 76, maybe some 548. I mean, whatever you can get your hands on. And some guys, I mean, Craig Williams, who owns Ex Novo, there's somewhere between 18 and 20 different clones in that 2-acre vineyard. And through that diversity, you ultimately end up with better balance. So you have some stuff that's more ripe, less ripe. And it's not just the balance of the wine itself, but the strength of the vineyard through that diversity. And avoiding monoculture, I think, is one of the things that people are thinking about now moving forward. Josh Bergstrom has a multi-clone planting. Lingua Franca has a multiple clone planting. The Ponzi's have multiple clone plantings. Evening Land had one back put in 07. It's kind of a west-facing section, but I think that for us, we believe that's the future, and there are more and more people doing that.
We also, when we were very lucky to go to France last year for the first time since we started the winery, and one of the big things that we were talking to the growers and producers that we were with were like, what are you seeing and what are you doing about climate change? And even on the IPNC Pinot broadcast this last weekend on Saturday, the question was posed to Dominique Lafon on that call, and he reiterated what we were hearing when we were in France, is that it really is going to come down to clones. And for so long, people had started planting earlier ripening clones, and now the ability to do more selection Masal, go to later ripening clones. I mean, that is all going to be a big component of dealing with climate change, I think, is multiple clones, later ripening clones. And so it's exciting. And we certainly,
super exciting.
We seek out multiple clones in every site. I mean, even some of the old school sites that we work with, they were planted in larger single clone blocks. In many cases, they're old enough now that clone isn't really the big issue, isn't the big translator at this point anyway. Yeah. But we look to have as many different clones in any given vineyard that we're working with, so we can pick them at the same time and co-ferment them and try to stimulate a Masal selection or clonal diversity as much as we can.
Yeah, and the other thing too, to what Eric is talking about earlier, farming, and in the last 3 years, we've really come to the realization that yield is everything with Chardonnay. Some of the producers that inspire us, whether it's Lamy, Rouleau, Lafon, Coche, Boisson Vado, Pickham. Lamy has some of the lowest yields in his village, and his fruit is ripe and has this intensity of flavor without lacking freshness. So 2018, Erica and I, after looking back at some of our favorite vintages, 14, 16, and this is, for Chardonnay specifically, COVID puppy,
devil child.
14 and 16 specifically were 2 very low yielding vintages. And when we picked, we had lower pHs, lower malics, but higher TA and complete ripeness at sub 13% alcohol, but just this intensity of flavor. So that kind of that weight with weightlessness feel. So in 2018, we set about setting our yield at the very beginning through aggressive shoot thinning. So instead of leaving, 20 to 22 shoots per vine, we were 14 to 16 shoots per vine. So our yield is automatically, as a generalization, dropped by about 25%. But that vine is only focused on what it's going to ripen, not ripening fruit that you're going to cut off at veraison, which is a pretty common practice to kind of get through flowering, get to veraison, and then thin a bunch. I think you shock the vines. The vine has wasted energy ripening fruit that's not going to be picked. And I think you've lost some of that vine's momentum. And we saw in 2018 at picking, my best friend was like, you should experiment on a couple of vineyards. And as Erica and I do, we're like, okay, great. We're going to do it with every vineyard we work with and not experiment at all. But what we saw at picking is everything we wanted. pHs below 3.1, malics in the mid 2s, alcohols around 13. And in many cases, we were picking 2 weeks before other people, but their fruit wasn't ripe, but ours was. And we got this intensity and density that we wanted
Of
with
flavor,
lightness
yeah.
of flavor without sacrificing all of the other things. So it's
Well, I've got
It's-
2008. I've got 2018 Cuvée Ruth here.
and
Pardon?
Cuvée and
And oh no, the Ruth is Ruth is the Pinot. They're both sitting here side by side. I'm looking at this.
Everybody, I confuse them myself.
we
so-
do it all the time.
Oh, no. Well, I have two daughters. I confuse them.
Right? Is that when you get, and then you start adding the dog names in there? It's great. You just like,
Yeah, that's a full. No, that's definitely a shift in your. That's part of the aging curve, and it definitely. I mean, it shows the power. I mean, 2018 was a hot year.
Yep.
Warm, but finished cool. So it was a more typical bud break. But September, temperatures dropped, high 60s, low 70s. So our finish was cooler, so that ripening acceleration, so you had sugars and flavors coming together instead of one going up before the other, and we could kind of pick whenever we wanted. And that those cool days and also cool nights just allowed for kind of a classic vintage. The biggest thing about 2018 is it's the driest vintage on record. So it was a full-on drought year for sure. There was some vine stress, and I think yield, both Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, were pretty critical in 2018 because of the very, very dry conditions. I mean, we were below average for rainfall for that entire growing season.
So were the vines shutting down actually?
You could see some of the vines starting to yellow, 3-4 weeks before picking. So in many cases, some people, and we did as well, where we needed to, would make another quality pass. So instead of making one thinning pass, we may have needed 2 or 3 just to make sure that what you're picking was ripe, and to give that vine the opportunity to ripen that fruit. It's one thing we want people to know. I mean, we're willing to sacrifice whatever it takes to make sure that whatever goes in that bottle is the best that we can do on a given vintage. And it's those little things that help really show off, both what the sites have to say and what the vintage has to say.
I know the dog is a blue healer.
Yes, we're fans of blue healers. So we have a little red healer here named Copper, and then our 2 15-year-old dogs we had to say goodbye to several weeks ago, and it was a pretty big hole that was left. I mean, those 2 dogs had experienced multiple jobs, starting this business, moving out here, and it was pretty tough. But this new little member of the family is full of energy, and it's a nice addition. So
They're great to have around a winery. Big believer in that.
Yeah, for sure.
And talk real quick about just really wines that are probably around and close to 18. So 2017, in terms of I guess we can talk about both Chardonnay and Pinot, but just in general.
Both vintages, very similar growing conditions. We cooled off in September. Picking dates were about the same. As we mentioned, 2018, much drier. 17, bigger yields across the board.
Yeah, that's a big difference.
There is Chardonnay. It was one more reason we were much more aggressive in fine-tuning our yields in 18. 17, yields were a little big. The wines are, I would say, more in the charming camp. Pinot Noir, it's a vintage where I would give the nod to Pinot Noir over Chardonnay in 17.
For us.
For us, where 18, I think they're both.
17 really, he was able to go work vintage in Burgundy in 2017 and came back with a lot of things that he noticed during that trip. And when he came back and we got through 17 vintage and the yields were heavier, we looked back at our favorite vintages and really realized that it came down to yield with 2016, 2012, and 14, right? Those were the 3 that were like
mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and so for us, 17 made us really, that was a big turning point. I think we're both very happy with wines and proud of the wines, but when you get to 2018, where the yields were much more honed in, it really will set the stage. And 19 is actually quite similar as well. I mean, the 3 coming off of 13, 14, 15, and 16.
Super hot.
Super
so
hot,
14 and 15.
super early.
hottest vintages back to back, and then 16 was hot and early. We started picking Pinot Noir on August 26th in 2016.
Yeah.
Down there.
In 2011, our last fruit arrived on November 2nd.
Yeah.
So very different. So 14, 15, 16, hot, 16 earliest vintage on record, and then 17 and 18 and 19 kind of trending more classic. What we used to expect in maybe the late 90s, early 2000s were, you know, third, fourth week of September, for the most part, picking Pinot Noir, maybe Chardonnay in that second week, and moving even into October with picking Temperance Hill on like October 5th in 2019.
Wow. Okay.
But yeah, there definitely some consistency. 2019, you know, we'll talk about that eventually. It definitely had one of the most challenging vintages in years. Very cool, incredibly high mildew pressure, rain in September. And there's going to be some people that compare 19 to 13, but they could not be more different, because 13 was hot and interrupted with 7 inches of rain in 5 days. Where 2019, we had 3 inches spread out over a month. There would be some showers here and there. You know, my first vintage was 1995 at St. Innocent, and 95, 96, and 97, it rained the whole time. And I'm like, harvest is not cool. This is not as fun as everyone said it to be. And then it happened. And, you know, I think you had to dance and work with Mother Nature and work around the rain and find your spots to pick. But, you know, 18 was pretty classic and epic and kind of a home run. In the grand scheme of things, relatively easy vintage, but a lot of power and intensity.
I think that's one thing to just, you know, take away for the last, if you look at the last 10 or 11 years, you have 2 of the latest coldest vintages on record, you know, 3 of the earliest and hottest vintages on record. You had Typhoon, and then you had some very moderate, normal, easy vintages. So, you know, when we talk about climate change, it's really about more extremes. And I think that the growers are doing an incredible job to really look at the vintage that they're handed and make some really important decisions early on in the growing season and with yields to really moderate if it's going to be a super early warm vintage or if it's going to be a super cool late vintage, and make choices that will ultimately provide really fantastic fruit.
Yeah,
so
not farming by recipe, not being like, I'm going to spray every 10 to 11 days, but oh my goodness, it just rained. I need to tighten up my spray program a little bit and make sure that my vines are taken care of. So we're fortunate though. We work with some, you know, there's amazing growers throughout this valley, but our family of growers that we work with,
we're honored.
We're honored. We've worked with them at a minimum of 5 to 6 years with every one of them. And our common goal is to grow the best possible fruit and put something special into bottle that represents their efforts, their vineyard efforts, and ours.
Yeah.
I think we have some photos here, which might take a little bit of time to pop up, but one photo of the Justice Vineyard. Which is obviously right where you sit. I think that's a good place to start.
Right now.
Yeah, that's and that's one of the Castile's first vineyards, correct?
Yeah, so the Bethel Heights Vineyard family is the 2 Castile brothers and their partners, Marilyn and Pat, and then Pat and Ted, half of the winery's family, purchased Justice. But it's actually interesting because it's all folding back into the Bethel Heights Vineyard family, as the winery has now brought it back into as one of the state vineyards. But they purchased it in, I think, right around
mid-90s and planted in 99.
Yeah.
It was.
So it's all Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, which we are very excited to get both from. When we first moved on to Justice Vineyard, there's Ted. When we first moved on to this vineyard, all of the fruit was tied up and spoken for, and there was nothing available. And we harassed and begged, and it took us 6 years to finally get
16, 12, 13, 14.
Anyways,
5
years to get a block of Pinot Noir, and then a few years later we were able to get some Chardonnay. So it's been and it's something that Ken worked with Justice since the 90s with St. Innocent. And so for him he really believed in the site, and we obviously look up to the whole Bethel Heights Vineyard family and think of them very much as mentors, and so it was wonderful to be able to work with their fruit. And they have now taken the vineyard, they're farming it. It was always live certified, which Ted was a huge part of developing that live certified program for low impact viticulture. And now they've even taken a step further in farming organic. And so it's been really just awesome to watch the evolution of the vineyard and the family and be here on the property.
Yeah.
And right nearby, we have a photo here of Seven Springs.
Yeah.
Yeah, Seven Springs, obviously iconic vineyard, planted in '83. You look at Drouin, Evesham Wood, St. Innocent, Christum, Patricia Green Cellars, Adelsheim, Rex Hill. I mean, you think of a great producer in this valley, and they all used to source fruit from Seven Springs. I mean, Domaine Duran used to get almost 25 tons from the site. Oh, there you go. So that's looking, gosh, so this is the Chardonnay block. So this is the La Source block. So this is the original plantings. On the right there is the single wire hanging block 2 lower. On the opposite side there is actually Gamay, and then up on the hill above on the top of the photo, that's the East Ridge. So what you're looking at is the original plantings from '83 and some of the best Chardonnay in the valley and some of the best Pinot Noir. We actually 2014, 2015, that hanging block on your right of the screen there, we got that block for 2 vintages. And then Raj and Sashi wanted it back, so begrudgingly we gave it back to them. But it was an honor to work with it. Yeah. And I believe that was either St. Innocent's old block or TDO's old block in the past, but really special. And 2007, when Evening Land took over the site, they retrellised everything, elevated the farming practices, and I believe took that vineyard, which was obviously great, to another level. And now they're selling fruit to other people, which is really a great thing.
Yeah, we get a little bit of Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. It's all, it was biodynamically farmed for quite a while. I think at this point it might just be organic.
Yep,
but they did a lot of biodynamics to sort of repair the conventional farming that had happened for a long time. Yeah. But it's beautiful East Slope, Eola Amity Hills, looks at Mount Hood every morning.
And the crew there has been on site now 12 years. Octavio, Sinovio, Andreas, and Daniel, they know it. They know it. And
they replanted most of it with Ryan Hannaford, and they know that site like the back of their hands.
I can go to Octavio. I'm like, Octavio, what do you think it's hanging? And he's like, I think it's about 3 3/4 tons per acre. Do you think? And I go, do you think we should leave? He's like, I would thin a little bit more, and I trust them. Yeah. So it's really working together as we do with all of our growers.
Just a quick little sidetrack here. I have a question from somebody about, which is I meant to ask a little earlier, but this is a good question. Thank you, Brian. How do you about your oak approach? Sure. There's a few questions within the question. 100% barrel fermented and aged, percentage of new oak on average, and puncheons or 228s for the new oak.
So this Chardonnay.
Yeah. So Chardonnay always, from the beginning, we wanted to work with larger format barrels, the higher juice volume to wood ratio. We have incorporated over the years, I'm not saying I'm old, but at 50, moving 500 liter puncheon racks around is a little bit more difficult.
50 is not old. You stop.
So 500 liter puncheons, 350 liter barrels, and some 228s.
I would say primarily though 350 liters at this, or maybe half and half on the puncheons and 350s, and then just like one little stack of 228s.
The volumes are usually random, and it's nice to have a little bit of both. New percentage for our Chardonnay is about 40 to 45%, depending on the wine. We are fortunate that Chassagne makes barrels for us. Having tasted our wines, it's Allier, and it's what he calls his cru toast, which is a light and long toast specifically for our wines with a slightly thicker stave. And then Dami, our relationship with Dominique Lafon, he's a very dear friend now, and we get a special Vosges selection, which only he gets for Comte Lafon and Lingua Franca gets. So we have those 2 barrels, and it is all, we start fermentation in tank. That was one of the things from 2017 that we brought back. It is all barrel fermented for its fermentation.
Yeah, it's
and
just when fermentation kicks off and you can have that fermentation be homogenized, then you go to barrel.
We take lots of lees to barrel, believing in healthy fermentations, all native fermentations, very little batonnage. We also believe that lots of lees to barrel helps contribute to a little bit of reduction in the wine. So 12 to 13 months in barrel, and then we rack to tank for an additional 4 to 5 months, a la Pierre Moret, Laflèvre, Rouleau, Lamy, Lafon, for that last bit of time in tank to really capture what that wine is, allow all the pieces to come together, capture that CO2, and just really tighten up and focus that wine.
It also stops the oak integration and oxidation process too.
Exactly.
So it captures a very fresh, bright stage, and which is really what the goal is with the Chardonnays is transparency and clarity of sight. It's very, I think that to try to not have the winemaker imprint be the signature and have the site be the signature is our goal.
So that last bit of tank time is evolution without oxidation.
I also saw Carry-On does that.
Yeah.
Back when I'm not sure now that the brothers split, but that was their old way. I'm also just kind of going back. You mentioned using Vosges, which is not real common with Chardonnay, or wasn't. It was relatively uncommon.
Yeah.
It was all Allier all day.
Yep, Allier all day. You know, Vosges, I think for us with some of those savory elements and the tension and more stone fruit and citrus driven, it kind of amplifies, I don't know, kind of maybe a touch of sweetness, where the Allier is definitely all savory elements and focus and minerality. And the 2 together just seem to really, really work for us.
You know,
So it's also very kind of interesting going back back in the late 80s and the early 90s at Ramonet. They used Allier for all the Premier Crus, and the Grand Crus. Back then they just had Bienvenue, Batard, and Montrachet got Vosges, which I always thought was fascinating.
Yeah.
And, and their theory was that the power of those wines, particularly the Batard and the Montrachet, could handle it.
Right.
And they liked each other.
Right. Yeah, it takes time to, 2011, we made 140 cases of Chardonnay. For 2019, we're at about 3,400.
And that's about 60% of your production, right?
Yep.
Okay. And then one more quick question. So again, somebody's asking, are you guys going to do a 2019 Gamay?
Yes. Oh yeah. We just bottled it.
Oh, well then somebody, so this person obviously has an inside line on this.
We just bottled the 2019 Gamay and the Aligote, which is the first vintage of Aligote that Ken was really inspired by both and worked with. Neither one of them are very common in the Willamette Valley. So finding really great vineyards, we stumbled across a good friend of ours, Janice Pate at Arlen, had some biodynamically farmed Gamay.
Yeah.
We stumbled across it during a conversation with her one day, and she mentioned it was available, so we jumped on it. And
she was actually going to graft it over to something else because she wasn't that interested in it. And I'm like,
well, I don't know. It wasn't that she wasn't interested; that she was being consulted to do so by someone, right. And we were saying no, like that. You'll have a waiting list for that Gamay. Don't do that. And then Ken worked with Craig Williams and the Williams family to graft over some Riesling at the new Saxa vineyard to Aligote. So that's the first vintage of that is coming online too.
Yeah.
Which is really, really exciting.
Yeah. Well, this is okay. So this is something that Eric will be able to answer. I think there's definitely an intersection between, the Gamay that's going on in there, and there's as we talked about earlier, there's a resurgence, there's a growing interest in it. Obviously, it's being grown on some pretty expensive dirt, so it's not like they're cheap. But Portland, where you worked in restaurants, Portland is and has been one of the biggest markets for Beaujolais in the country for many, many years.
Yeah. I mean, it's a huge, I mean, I remember clamoring for the Brickhouse Gamay every year when it was released, clamoring for, Chehalem, Harry Peterson Nedry used to make both a Pinot Noir, Gamay Noir co-ferment, and I can't remember what the name is off the top of my head now, but I think it's On Cerise, and then also a Gamay. They were both so gorgeous. And it's a huge Beaujolais market. It's also a huge Piedmont. Like, it's one of the biggest Italian markets in the entire country. Yeah. Like, behind Chicago, it's, I think, number 1 or number 2 is Chicago, which is crazy.
I think at one point, Riecene, which makes about 4,000 cases a year of Chianti Classico, was like, we could sell our entire production to Portland. We're not going to do that because we need to spread it around. But it's a very interesting market for sure. Yeah.
And what about a sparkling wine program?
No.
No.
No, we're going to make very good Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, a smidge of Aligoté and Gamay, charge fair prices. And we're going to let the professionals in Champagne do what they do best. And we're going to support them and buy that. There's definitely a sparkling wine movement in the Valley. And I think there's...
And we celebrate them.
Absolutely celebrate it. It is a lot of work, but
it's also a huge amount of investment in space. I mean, we make 5,500 cases in a 3,000 case facility. And to do sparkling wine right, the way we want to do it, with the Solera and... and aging on Tourage, it would be, no way. I asked him once, I said, will you make me sparkling wine? He's like, no, baby, I'll make the best wine I possibly can, and I'll buy you sparkling wine.
3 to 4 years of base wines, all our Von Claire, and then do 2 to 3 years in bottles, so 7 years out, and
That's for people with more working capital than we currently have.
And then there's definitely going to be some really cool stuff. Some people have put a lot of investment into it and are doing. I think there'll be some really cool sparkling wines coming out of the Valley. It's been here before. I mean, St. Innocent started out as a sparkling wine only project, and then he made really great Pinot Noir and Chardonnay.
And Argyle's killed it. They make beautiful sparkling wines, and they can have that. Drink all theirs.
Yeah. What will be the first vintage for the Aligoté? Will be
2019.
2019.
Oh, so 19.
Craig talking about it for years. And Craig's very particular and wanted specific plant material. I don't know where it came from, but if I could guess, it probably came by way of Rouleau or someone else. So it's only 0.36 acres. But Josh, the clusters were 650 grams. They were like footballs. So it's good. 1 cluster per shoot. We got just a little under 2 tons. So it's going to be. We're pretty excited about it. It's electric. We play with reduction and we embrace it and like what it does with wines. This goes pretty next level, and I think some people are going to be. We hope people like it as much as we do.
Yes.
Okay, and for 2020, someone's asking what blocks of 7th Spring Pinot are you getting for 2020? And they say hello to Lucy.
We in 2020, we were actually not getting 7 Springs Pinot Noir. We will still be getting the 7 Springs Chardonnay moving forward. But there was a change in the vineyard, and we needed to make a change. And I think Raj and Sachi are growing their program too. And so unfortunately, we will not be working with 7 Springs Pinot Noir anymore. I know that's probably gasp worthy and for some of our amazing supporters, but
we have our acre of Chardonnay there, and we did happen to step into 1981 planting of own rooted Pommard from Temperance Hill. So old vines are great, and Temperance Hill is also an amazing vineyard. So
I think we have a photo of Temperance Hill here that we can.
Having an opportunity to work with some of those old own-rooted vines that are really kind of I don't know if you would say,
Yeah,
there it is.
there it is.
Kind of
In the bottom right here, this long block in the bottom, that is the north block of
Yep.
Temperance Hill. We get the farthest acre to the, what goes to the east,
left.
but to the left. And then, yeah.
That's like fall. So, getting, not working with Seven Springs this year is kind of a bummer, but, being able to work with some vines that were really kind of, old, own-rooted Pinot Noir was really the foundation of what the Willamette Valley was built upon. And they're all going to get ripped out in the next, 5 to 10 years, and they'll be gone. So this is an opportunity that we're looking forward to. And obviously Di Chris, who farms this vineyard masterfully going back to 2000, is another one of those great people to work with.
That's a good photo, and
It's a great
remarkable vineyard.
Yeah.
And if you look back over the years, what Jim Anderson, Patty Green, he's making something like 7 bottlings, I think, he's doing Freedom Hill. Sorry.
Patty worked with Temperance Hill back in their Toy Moore days. I think their last bottling was 99.
Yeah, and I think they still do, I believe, sometimes at least.
Awesome.
But they sell obviously to some of the very best people in your whole community, without a question. There's another. Somebody's saying never had any of your wines. Want to try them? What are 2 of them that you would suggest I start with? Well, I think I've got the 2 right here.
I think the 2 that you have, the Cuvée Ruth and the Cuvée Anne. Cuvée Ruth was named after Sue and Andy Simon, sort of in honor. They came in as partners in 2012, and we, as a thank you for them believing in us and coming in, and they taught us a lot through the years. So we named Cuvée Ruth after them. It's our best sites and older vines from Eola Amity Hills blended together, and then the Cuvée Anne, which is named after my mama, is also Eola Amity Hills, and a blend of all the best sites we work with. It's Ex Novo and Justice and Seven Springs and Sojo, excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
And also has some older vines in it. I think both of those, we take so much pride and so much detail in blending them to make sure that they represent this AVA that we love so much, and also do the honors to these women that they are named after. So I would say that would be a great place to start.
Yeah, those are, I don't know if flagship is the right word, but those truly represent what we're trying to accomplish and what we feel Eola Amity Hills has to say. Erica and I, when we do the blending, we taste all the wines together, and, kind of cellar palate, production side, and then front of the house side. Sometimes there's some discussions about the level of reduction, negotiations on certain barrels, but it's a lot of fun putting those wines together and sending them out as representatives of us, the places they come from, and the Eola Amity Hills.
Yeah, definitely.
So speaking of the 18 Ruth, just trying it right now. Got to guess there's a lot of whole clusters in here.
2018, we play with whole cluster in that kind of at most about 30%.
It's vintage to vintage, vineyard to vineyard.
Vineyard to vineyard.
2018, where was our whole cluster?
We averaged, I think it was average about 30%, maybe 25%. And, it's, again, we don't make wine by recipe. There was, one vineyard in 2018, Temperance Hill, had lots of Millerandage or hens and chicks, and it was destemming terribly. So probably 20% of those little berries were sticking to the rachis, and I stopped the destemmer and we just put it all in there. So it was like 50%. Ex Novo was about 60%. So we may have been a little bit higher, but I think it brought some of that savory element and that tension that we like in a riper, slightly more fruit-forward vintage.
Thank you.
Because this is one of the, at least at this stage, it's obviously it's very young, but it is one of the spiciest renditions of that bottling that I've had in quite a while. I mean, in a good way. I love that style of Pinot.
So the Ruth was bottled a year. So we bottled Ruth before vintage, and then Anne gets bottled in December. So you're almost a year in bottle for the Cuvée Ruth. A lot of Sojo in there, Seven Springs, Ex Novo, and I believe Justice. So I believe those are the 4 that went into that, because all of Temperance Hill got bottled on its own.
And somebody else is asking, you're talking about how you're maxed out with space. Is Will Hamilton a violin still working in there, or?
No, we missed him so much. Will was growing his production as well, and he was sort of capped at how far he could go here. He did 5 vintages with us.
13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Yep, 5
vintages with us. Was an unbelievable
huge part of everything that we did. You know, Patricia Green Cellars was nice enough to help us launch our little dream by letting us make wine there. 2013, Will decided to do his own thing. She was 6 months pregnant, my assistant winemaker, and we were a tiny crew. So to have him here and help us, you know, he and I went out to dinner, and he was looking around like, you have one option. You're going to work with us.
Or you're going to work with us.
Or you're going to work with us. And
I mean,
so
it helped everybody. He was able to launch his with trading labor for space. And we got this man who is like 4 people working. You know, he and Ken worked together.
He's like having 4 guys in the cellar, and we knew, you know, ticks. I could tell when he was frustrated with something. He can tell when I was irritated with something. But we work together, and he is making incredibly thoughtful, site-specific, he's making wine that he believes in for himself, and then finding people that like what he does, and what he's doing is epic.
All of you guys should check out Violin Wines, and they're beautiful.
Beautiful, and he's working his way into better and, you know, elevating his fruit sources and continuing to work with better and better people. You know, we share some Sojo Chardonnay with him, Sojo Pinot Noir, and then he gets a block of Justice that's right in front of our house.
Yeah, Ken is surrounded by women at Harvest these days. So we have Kathy McBride, who comes from Australia. She has a small label that we're, again, giving her a little bit of room to do. She's only 4 barrels at this point, but it's still Greenstone. And then Jess Pierce, who works with us, has a Riesling project called Pierce Wines. And so both of them are making a little bits of wine, starting their dream of their own labels. And we're honored to support that. And we definitely, there were some times during COVID where we talked to Will and said, you know, if you maybe we should have you back in, but I think we're both pretty set in our production levels, and there's just no way to fit him back in this space. But we would take him in a heartbeat.
He's an amazing, amazing man, and we were so lucky to have him.
Yeah, it was very cool that you guys are able to help, you know, space, whatever, encourage. Right. I mean, that's the future, right? At one point, you were the future.
Now we're the old guys on the block. But you know, it's part of the thing about this valley. It's incredibly.
No, you're not the old guy on the block. Steve Zorner still lives there.
Yeah, this is true. I mean, his first vintage is still 78.
Yeah, he's been making Pinot Noir in America longer than anybody else consecutively.
Yeah, for sure.
I think.
Yeah, going back to the Calera days.
For sure.
Yeah, there's a great old photo floating around. I'm sure you can find it online, and it's a group shot, and the people that are in there, the Pinot people, it's Steve, it's Ken Wright, it's Dick Sanford, it's Richard Graff. Have you seen that photo?
We'll have to track it down.
It's worth looking at. I mean, it's about 20 guys, and they are all, and of course back then it was all guys, right? And that has changed a lot, especially if you look, and in your region. It's been like that for a while. I mean, my gosh, right now you got Wynn, obviously you have Isabel, you had Patty, you know, going way back, obviously.
Louisa,
Ash, Louisa, Veronique.
Yeah. We need more.
Got Julia Cattrall at Luma.
Of course, you have Mimi, who has Castile, who has an incredible, one of the great presences.
Kim Abrams at Lingua Franca with Thomas.
And you've got
there's some amazing Gina Elfman. There's a lot of women, but I think we'll see more, and it's exciting to see how many young women are getting in. You know, with Kate Norris at Division and Brianne Day and pray tell.
We got Kelly, of course, Kelly Fox. Has been
around. Yeah, there's a lot of women, and you know, I think too, if you there's a lot of amazing producers in Burgundy, but a couple of our favorite producers in Burgundy are women. I mean, if we love Mounier Gibourg, we love the Barthold wines, and you know they're inspiring
and grow,
and grow.
Yeah, I mean, you look. I mean, the old story of the Mounier sisters, that the dad was going to sell off his domain, and the rumor has that the guy he wanted to sell it to, he's like, no, you should let your daughters do it because they can do it, and they did it. The rumor is that it was Jacques Sayce. Yeah,
Jacques Sayce said, no, you let your daughters run that domain.
It's awesome.
Look now.
There's people experimenting with different varietals here. I mean, there's natural wine, there's amphora, there's classics that are fermented in stainless. But I think the biggest thing that is elevating everything we do and adjusting to what Mother Nature is giving us is what's happening in the vineyards.
Yeah, the farming.
Yeah, I think that what's happening, and not just in the Willamette Valley, if you look at what's very slowly, for obvious reasons, isolation happening down in the Rogue Valley. If you look at Herb Quaddy is doing, and if you look at the work at Cowhorn, what they're up to, which is extremely impressive, starting with farming. Oregon is an amazingly exciting, it's a very dynamic place right now.
For sure.
And the fact that you guys are helping to preserve Gamay, my Beaujolais loving heart absolutely appreciates that. Messing around with Aligoté, the emergence of the sparkling wines, as we talked about earlier, Syrah in the Willamette. It's a really super dynamic place, and it's also, I think, very cool that you all have a lot of cross pollination, right? I mean, and especially in your, what I would call your generation. If you look at Big Table Farm and what they're doing. I mean, like Mike Etzel got almost a new lease on life with Sequitur, which you get fruit from.
Yes. Yep.
It's changing. It's more dynamic right now, I think, than it's ever been.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. It's a very exciting time.
Exciting times. And another place that needs to be talked about is the gorge.
Yeah.
With
the
what Hayu is doing out there and Alema.
Amazing.
They're tapping into some pretty special stuff out there as well.
Yeah.
Is that where the Funk Vineyard?
The Funk, in Walla Walla, the rocks.
Walla Walla, out on the rocks, yeah. Which the Syrah, I've had a few Syrahs from there, which are
awesome,
remarkable.
Yeah, they are. I mean,
because so much of the Walla Walla Valley is in Oregon.
In Oregon, yeah. Walla Walla itself is in Washington, but a lot of the best vineyards. I mean, all that whole Octave project that's above the rocks, that's on just that rock slope where Doubleback is too. There's some crazy wines coming out there.
Seven Hills.
Yeah, it's the Seven Hills. Yeah, Oregon's a special place, and it's so diverse from, I mean, you can have desert and coast and the green Willamette Valley and the gorge, and all of it is so dynamic and different, and it's inspiring how many different wines and styles can come out of this one region.
Well, it's also, I highly encourage people to visit because it's so easy if you fly from the East Coast. So people out here say, wine trip or whatever. It's like, look, fly out to Portland. You're probably going to land in the evening, but still you land, even if it's at 9 o'clock at night, get your car by 11 o'clock at night, you're there. I mean, you're checking into your hotel, and that's counting getting in the car. You're checking into your hotel in Newark or wherever. And not to mention the fact that if you're out there for a few days, 5 or 6 days or something, it's so easy to hop up into Portland, which still has this, positively remarkable food and restaurant scene. Also it's, and the food's improving a lot in the valley, without a doubt.
Amazing food down here.
Yeah. Whether it's Recipe or Thistle,
Community Plate or Capo. Yeah, there's some great things happening.
Dos Mundos for tacos.
Dos Mundos for tacos, and ladies for Jory. Yeah, there's some great tacos.
If you want to go down to Corvallis, you can hit Taco Vino as well.
They've got good mezcal.
And you
Very-
also have an In-N-Out burger about 20 minutes away from you right now.
Which still has a 2-hour line to
Yeah.
get food from it. It's insane to me, but
Had to have a little California pitch there. Anyway, it is that time, and it flew
Okay.
by. Thank you guys so much.
Our pleasure, Josh. We really appreciate
Honor.
you inviting us, and we hope you're well, and we can't wait to see
hope
you
you
out
like the
here.
wines. Can't wait to see the report. And yeah,
Oh, I'm gonna have fun. I'm gonna have fun drinking these two tonight. My
Awesome.
produce won't be as good as yours.
It's all right. Well, thank you again very much. We really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
stay healthy over there on Long Island.
Okay, it's been a real pleasure, and it's great to see you guys.